Well, thanks for coming back for this afternoon's sessions. I think we had a really productive morning of ideas, and I'm excited to continue this. The next panel is going to be on a new hope, how to rebuild Ukraine, something really significant given the billions of dollars in war damage already accumulated. And we have a great panel ahead. It's Adam Eberhardt, the director of the Center for Strategic Studies with the Warsaw Enterprise Institute. We've got Anna Jarosz-Friis, who's the acting director of the Ukraine service, NEAR.E. Benjamin Tallis, senior research fellow with the German Council on Foreign Relations. Oleg Ustenko, an advisor to the president of Ukraine, and this will be moderated by Daniel Szeligowski. He's the head of the Eastern Europe program with the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Let's give it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome to the third session of the PRISM Strategic Art 23 conference. The way we have actually sequenced our today's discussion, so the route that our strategic arc have been sailing since this morning, is by no means accidental. So first we focus on how to win the war with Russia. But once we finally get there, this is not going to be the end of the story. There will be new challenges waiting for us, and this is exactly when Ukraine's post-war reconstruction comes into the fore. The biggest reconstruction since World War II, the biggest reconstruction project anywhere in the world, the world's largest reconstruction site. So these are just few headlines that I have come across today in the morning, which show us the scope of the challenge that lies ahead. And to unpack this challenge, of course, we have invited a stellar group of speakers who will help us navigate through these choppy waters. Without any further ado, Oleg, I want to start with a question addressed to you. So all these headlines point to the Herculean task that Ukraine reconstruction is going to be. Let us grasp the scale and the complexity of the problem. So where we are in terms of war destruction, registering the damage done, planning for post-war reconstruction, generally the Ukrainian vision for post-war reconstruction.
Okay. So basically, to start with, I would say that the damage we already received from this aggression is really huge. We are talking about huge numbers. The direct cost, if you are just thinking in terms of economic and financial costs, they are on a level of $750 billion US. This is the direct damage which we already experienced. But if you add the indirect damages we received, I would argue that the number is going to be much bigger and would be on a level of at least $1 trillion US. For you to understand, someone have to keep in mind that our historical maximum GDP, which we had in 2021, was on a level of $200 billion US. So we are talking about the overall damage of 5 times of our historical maximum GDP. And of course, when we are coming back to the issue of reconstruction in Ukraine, we are talking about, full compensation for this damage. And this is only the one issue we have to keep in mind when we are analyzing future plans for reconstruction of Ukraine. And then, of course, obviously, how we are going to proceed. Is that a role only for government? For governments, if you wish, of our government and the governments of our allies, or it's also a role for private sector. And I would say that for sure we can see here the role for both, for private sector and for governments of our own government, and as I said, for governments of our allies. From the very beginning of this invasion, I remember the very, first weeks of the invasion when the President Zelensky was very clear when he said that, again, it was a second week probably of invasion when there was a task for everybody in the office that we have to think in terms of the rebuilding of the country. So I would say that starting from that, many groups started their work, their assessments of the future prospects, how it should be done. But in my view, it's no doubt that what should be done, if you wish, Ukraine has to be a candy, a candy which will be showing for everybody in the world that here it is an example, and successful example, of the winner of this war, which is Ukraine, the winner of this war, which is supported by the whole civilized world, by its allies, and here the results we are receiving. And the results we have to receive, we have to understand that, of course, many topics are under discussions now, and of course everything related to our offensive operation, which is extremely important, but at the same time, when we are talking about the economic and financial side of the issue here, we are talking about several tracks, if you wish, which we have to explore even at this time. And when we are talking about the whole damage and the necessity to rebuild Ukraine, we also mean so-called fast-track recovery. And this fast-track recovery is also costly. And as you are aware, we are running a significant budget deficit, and definitely we don't have money in our hands to do this quick recovery or fast-track recovery by our own. Definitely we need for that funding. And here we are talking about the amount of money of, I would say, between 15 to 20 billion US dollars, which are needed for to rebuild the most critical part of our critical infrastructure, which is our electrical infrastructure, which is our social infrastructure, including hospitals, including schools, including bridges and the most important roads, which we need to rebuild, and this is the most urgent need. The winter is, or the autumn is approaching very soon, despite the fact that we are in spring. We remember the case of last year. So before that, we have to be fully prepared, which means that we have to concentrate our efforts in these plans as well. But when we are talking about the future recovery of Ukraine, the post-war recovery of Ukraine, which actually, again, which starts now with this fast-track recovery, despite the fact that we are in a state of war, despite that fact, we have to proceed right now. But in the future, when we are talking about the future, here we have plenty of options. Private sector, we see the role of private sector, of our own private sector, but for international investors as well. You definitely saw many meetings which President Zelensky held with big investors. We have to have a support from international institutions, and we see the role for international institutions here as well. And we see the role of governments. So all this is needed not just to rebuild the economy, but build the new country on completely new basis. Which means that the new economy have to be rebuilt, should be rebuilt as energy efficient economy, which was already announced, green technology, green energy technology, new technologies, and everything related to security as well. So many things are under discussions, and this is I would say, from my point of view, it's really, it's really urgent task, and we have to have consensus now. It's not like we are coming to post-war period and only after that we are starting discussion. No, the discussion are already coming in different capitals, including Kiev, but at the same time, the most urgent one, as actually was already mentioned by President Zelensky in his latest European tour when he said that fast-track recovery is something and extremely important.
Yeah, two quotes that I would like to share with you. The first one from Ursula von der Leyen is, "We stand ready to take a leading role in the international reconstruction efforts to help rebuild democratic and prosperous Ukraine." The second quote from Vice President of the Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis, "In the longer term, the European Union will lead a major financial efforts to rebuild a free and democratic Ukraine." Anna, I would like to turn to you now, of course. Yesterday at the dinner, I tried to figure out whether you brought with you from Brussels some big suitcase. You did, but it is not as big as I thought it could be. And my question to you is as simple as possible. So who's gonna pay for Ukraine's reconstruction, and what role would the European Union like to play in the whole efforts?
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll start by explaining who is supporting Ukraine's efforts financially this year, because these are the figures that we know, and then we can maybe see to how to look to the future. The Ukraine has two major financial type of needs this year. One is to stabilize the budget, so to keep the state functioning, and the second is the fast recovery, as Oleg just mentioned. The good news is that the budget needs are covered by own Ukraine effort, including tax collection and very prudent management of the budget that is really laudable, but also by major international effort in terms of financial assistance. And here, following the President von der Leyen statement, the Union has taken a lion's share, and also with macro-financial assistance plus, that's how we label our instrument, 18 billion euros for 2023, has, as of last December, given to Ukraine not only size, but predictability of the financial flows. And this is incredibly important for the finance minister to be able to manage the budget, and therefore for the state to be able to properly function and continue to show the amazing resistance across the whole of government and the society. That predictability of the financial flow is crucial. And the Union has so far, in line with the agreed schedule of payments, disbursed 6 billion euros. The rest will come in line with the agreed monthly payments and quarterly reviews. And that commitment and predictability enabled both an IMF program that spans over 4 years and counts on significant continued donor support, but also, if you want, galvanized other international donors, the biggest among them after the Union being the US, but also Japan and a number of member states that contributed with bilateral assistance to budget support. So in a way, we are pretty much, as of about a month, in a good place in terms of having covered the needs of the state for 2023. What we have not yet covered is the needs for the fast recovery, which is the critical infrastructure repairs. And here the Union again will contribute with the budgetary means, but this is also where we use together with the government of Ukraine and the US government and the G7, the donor coordination platform, in order to identify where the gaps are and try to collect the missing support in order for the critical repair to be undertaken and financed now. Because for the bigger reconstruction to happen, certain preconditions have to be met. Part of them is that physical infrastructure functions and that the society has means to return to Ukraine and that the economy has conditions to be restarted. And for that, these critical infrastructure repairs that Oleg mentioned are absolutely indispensable. And we are working with the international donors, but here the Union works hand in hand with the government of Ukraine and the US government to basically to collect the missing money. Thank you.
Yeah, the preconditions is actually what I would also ask Ben about. Many compare post-war Ukraine's reconstruction to the reconstruction, rebuilding of Europe after the World War II. And when we compare it to the Marshall Plan and to the post-war situation, actually, there was one very important feature. So the economic aid was actually coupled with security guarantees. What's the security precondition if we are really to discuss post-war Ukraine's reconstruction?
Thank you very much indeed, and what a pleasure it is to be here at this excellent event in Warsaw and to discuss this, which I think is one of the most important issues we face today. You're absolutely right that these two things must be coupled, and I think it's essential also that we look at this not only in terms of reconstruction but construction, and remember that in fact the Marshall Plan came at a time of reconstructing a shattered Germany, a shattered Europe, but also constructing the kind of security order that kept us safe in Western Europe, at least for many years. And this is where I think we often actually get this the wrong way around when talking about the reconstruction of Ukraine, because what the reconstruction of Ukraine truly offers us is a chance to reconstruct or better construct our own security order and to reconstruct the chance that the democratic world has to win the systemic competition that we face. So I think we're looking down the wrong end of the telescope a lot of the time here, seeing this as a problem somewhere else to be solved, whereas actually this is a wonderful opportunity for what we often call the West, but I think we should be thinking more widely about the democratic world to reconstitute our hope of the future. And part of our hope of the future is Ukraine's hope of the future as well. And that's what we're truly trying to, I think, construct forward. And that has several elements, one of which relates to the security guarantees that will unnecessarily underpin any reconstruction or construction. And as was very well mentioned on the panel this morning, the only true security guarantee for Ukraine after the war in the medium term is NATO membership. That will also be the most advantageous security guarantee for the rest of Europe and indeed for the rest of the democratic world. In the interim, though, there are measures that we can take. Bilateral security guarantees or security guarantees of the willing, particularly nuclear-armed states such as the UK and the US. The UK, for example, provided a security guarantee to Finland in the interim period before it was actually able to join NATO after it had stated its intention to do so. And I think we need to be looking into those kind of arrangements and the sequencing of those kind of arrangements in order to facilitate that kind of predictability that Anna mentioned in financial terms, but to have predictability, reliability, and reassurance in security terms as well. The other aspect of this is security in another way. And this security I talk about here is the security of hope in the future. We know that a crucial part of Ukraine's recovery, and indeed of the West's reconstruction, is about engendering that virtuous cycle of reform and reward that has been problematic in the past when the EU has dealt with Ukraine, and our hesitant embrace of Ukraine, which was as much about keeping Ukraine at arm's length as bringing it closer, was partly predicated on a vicious cycle whereby political goals were actually hidden behind this technocratic facade of meeting entry criteria and so on and so forth, which left Ukrainians with very little hope that they would actually be included and very little incentive to make reform. We've now seen a chance to break into that cycle, and I think this is essential to keep that hope going. And I think the Swedish Prime Minister's remarks at the Munich Security Conference, which went largely unreported, were really important in this regard. What he said was that Ukraine's entry, for example, for the EU, must be merit-based. But merit-based cannot be an excuse to, again, go soft or go slow on Ukraine's entry. And it's that kind of commitment and progressive commitment to integration that will also provide the kind of guarantee, this other form of security, which the two work together, that will allow the kind of private investment that will actually provide the bulk of the funds that will be needed to restore Ukraine's critical facilities, to restore Ukraine's thriving economy. And so I think understanding this a little bit more clearly and putting these things together, Daniel, as you rightly said, is extremely important. The last thing I'd say on that, because you posed a question to us in advance of how to make this actually happen rather than just leave it to the nice words that we often hear at conferences or at donor reconstruction platforms or so on. This virtuous cycle, I think, is key to that. And we've seen that on the battlefield for Ukraine, nothing succeeds like success. That when Ukraine is taking territory, when Ukraine is moving forward at speed and pushing the Russians out, the amount of support they gain from the West and from elsewhere is higher. The same thing will happen as Ukraine makes its reforms, as Ukraine builds back better, in fact builds forward. And the more we can engender that virtuous cycle, the better it will be for buying in donors. The other part is alliance pressure. And there should be as much alliance pressure on the financial side here as there is on the military side. Keeping our collective spine stiff, keeping our eyes collectively focused on the future in order to actually engender those two reinforcing cycles of positive and protective security that we need to reconstruct Ukraine and indeed to reconstruct the West and our hope of winning that systemic competition.
Yeah, I must say I've been patiently waiting for you when you're going to mention your term neo-idealism. You have not done it yet, but you will have a chance in the next round of questions. So I will turn to Adam now with two basic questions. When we should start reconstruction? If we are looking at the opinion polls, actually the Ukrainian society is divided by half. So half of the people say, do it now, and half of the people say, let's wait until the end, until the war is over. So this is the opinion poll done by rating group. When to start, and on what conditions? So they say there are no free lunches. Is there free reconstruction as well, or should we actually demand? Should we ask something from Ukraine in return?
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. Well, I think there are two conflicting perspectives on reconstruction. When to start it? There is a business one and a political one. So a private sector would argue that there is no large reconstruction before the war is over, because of obvious reasons. There are some fair points behind it. Well, first of all, as long as Russia fires missiles, it is an economic risk. There is a direct physical risk for construction companies to bring their people there. It is also the problem that Russia will be tempted to destroy what we have already been rebuilt. I can understand the logic behind waiting for whole reconstruction of Ukraine. There are some arguments that we should focus on restoring critical infrastructure. It was already stated. Indeed, no doubt, what international partners should do in the interim period is to focus on critical infrastructure. And we have already achieved quite a lot. Just let me give you an example of repairing electric network in Ukraine over the last half a year, which was a huge, even somehow underrated success by Ukraine and also world community. There was a huge support from Poland, from other countries in this regard. But my point is that waiting for a large reconstruction of Ukraine till the war is over would be a mistake. It would be a mistake because of political considerations. First of all, the very notion of reconstruction should be perceived in the way what was stated by Oleg, by others. It should not be just a building back. It should be a modernization of Ukraine with a final goal of bringing Ukraine closer to European Union and eventually membership within the European Union. So this kind of reconstruction has a very important, also a moral point behind it. It is about motivation. It is about trying to get, well, you cannot wait with doing some important things for half a year, for 1 year, for 2 years, because first of all, it will be used by Russia to prolong the conflict. Once Russia is not able to conquer Ukraine, they will be trying to transform the conflict into a protracted one and delay the process of modernization in Ukraine and hope to transform Ukraine into a failed state. So we should show that we are able to achieve goals of reconstruction of Ukraine as fast as possible. There is also a very important aspect which is connected with it is a front. It is an additional front of the war. So if we prove successful in reconstruction of Ukraine, if we prove effective in building back a better Ukraine, not an old one, but a better Ukraine, then there is a clear signal that we are successful. we cannot allow Russia to set the tempo of reconstruction. But one more thing, because you, Daniel, asked me about the conditions. You know, I think that there is one thing I really fear about reconstruction of Ukraine. So it is a ownership by Ukraine. Because according to all documents, if you take Lugano conference, it is stated that the reconstruction process should be led and driven by Ukraine. But what does it really mean? How could we arrange it in a way that Ukraine has an ownership over the program? Because, you know, I fear a scheme in which Western companies, which Western countries and institutions will allocate funds. Then they will select some attractive, from their perspective, assets, projects to be rebuilt. Then they will send their own companies with their own staff. They will build back the building. They will issue an invoice. They will get their money back, and they will depart. And it is a problem. It is a problem that such a reconstruction does not necessarily lead to modernization of Ukraine. It does not necessarily lead to creating small and medium-sized enterprises there. It does not necessarily lead to supporting modernization of Ukraine. So what I don't like, for instance, there is a discussion about areas of responsibility. Yes, but Denmark is already focused on Mykolaiv. United Kingdom is opting for Kiev. Italy is talking about Odessa. It resembles me, great powers carving out China in the late 19th century or Africa. So what I would be the most afraid of is having a reconstruction in a neo-colonial way, where we just allocate funds, when we just send construction companies from Western Europe, we rebuild buildings, issue invoice and departure. It is the biggest problem. How to make Ukrainians provide them with an ownership of the project. It is the most important. It is even more important than the question whether to start immediately or to start with some delay. Thank you.
Oleg, so back to you again. How you applause for Adam? How Ukraine plans to attract donors and investors, but still to make sure that your plan is implemented at the end of the day, not some plan that belongs to the companies?
So look, when we are talking about the reconstruction of Ukraine, we mean, of course, many different things. When I'm thinking in terms of social infrastructure, for example, hospitals, schools, I can see here definitely the role for governments and for allies. I mean, I can agree that it should be, of course, done. Everything should be done in the most modern way now. But when I am thinking in terms of plants, when I am thinking in terms of productional facilities, do we really believe that it's going to be an effort done by the government, or we see the role of the private sector? In my view, this is definitely the role of the private sector. Nobody from government could really understand what should be done in, I don't know, in metallurgical company or in energy company, but the private sector. So here I see definitely the role for private sector, and it doesn't mean that it's just for Ukrainian private sector. What I think that it's crucially important, we need to build an equal field for everybody when we are talking about private projects. So equal field means that those obstacles we used to have before the war, when I was talking to investors in Ukraine before the war, let's say in 2020, 2021, people were complaining for certain problems. Those were not enough protection of property rights. People were talking about judicial system and obviously necessity to reform the judicial system. People were talking about administrative barriers in Ukraine.
Some of these problems are still there.
Some of these problems is still there, but what is needed from the international community, and here I would agree completely with Ben, so is definitely to provide certain tracks which will motivate and stimulate these changes in the country to improve the business or, if you wish, investment climate in the country. And what are those largest motivations? Definitely EU membership, and absolutely agree with you, NATO membership. So those are two most important tracks which are going to stimulate changes in the country, in a sense that it's not going to be picked up projects here and there, but it's going to be a normal field for all businesses, international and local, to operate in the country. And for that, we are coming also to the issue of money, funds. When we are talking about projects in social sphere, we know where to get this money, right? We have more than 300 billion of the Russian Central Bank under arrest, frozen now. We have significant money from Russian nomenclatura, which are frozen now, and we are still deciding how to use, right, this money, how to make this money available for Ukraine immediately, right now, for the compensation. But this is, you know, this is only a part of the story. And the most important part of the story is not even those money. The most important part of the story is the private sector. So the conditions are the most important one. And when we are talking about rebuilding of Ukraine, we are talking about conditions. This is the most, you know, the most important issue. And I would say that I do not agree that there is even a discussion in Ukraine that half of our people still believe that we have to wait until the war is ended. No. The changes have to be done right now. What we have to start with? We have to start with this fast-track recovery. We need energy, we need houses for our thousands of people who, you know, who just, whose houses just disappeared because of this war. We need bridges, we need roads, we need hospitals. We need everything what will be, what will make our lives in Ukraine, if I can say, normal under these terrible conditions of war. The country has to be operational, and people have to understand that the changes are already coming. And again, the most important signal in here would be our NATO membership and our EU membership. And starting from that, we can, you know, make tremendous amount of good and positive changes in the country.
Okay, so you mentioned private sector. So imagine for a moment that I am a wealthy Polish investor. I have a nice suit, deep pockets full of Polish zlotys, and I'm considering whether to put my money behind Ukraine's success. Imagine you have 1 minute to convince me that this is a worthy case.
So basically, when we are talking about private sector, yes, the role for private sector now is just to be prepared for the future reconstruction of Ukraine. But at the same time, if you are a private sector and if we are talking about projects which are going to be financed now, as I said, from the most critical fast-track recovery plans, are you willing to participate in those projects which are already coming in the country? So probably I would say that yes. Of course, we all remember that there is a relation between risk and the profitability. And of course, if the risk is high, the profitability of the project should be high. But at the same time, you know, it's just a starting point. You're just starting. You have to be prepared for your future projects in Ukraine, unless you are compensated for this project now. And still, you know, there is another issue, which is a war insurance. And we still talking about war insurances, which might be provided for international investors also now. Then another issue, of course, which is, you know, highly related to this, is where we are going to have this insurance fund. But this is something which can stimulate the investor to come to the country, despite the fact that the country is still in the war.
Okay, so first past the post. And you mentioned EU membership, and there's been this buzzword that Ukraine's reconstruction will be linked to Ukraine's European integration. And I wanted to ask you what it means in practice, that you cannot follow with the reconstruction unless there is no EU membership, or what's the, how should we interpret it?
I would interpret it in a very straightforward and practical way from the point of view of any investor considering taking part either in the fast recovery in 2023 or any projects going forward also in 2024 and beyond. When Ukraine applied for membership and when the Union granted Ukraine the candidate status, Ukraine made a choice of a regulatory regime. That is basically saying, I, as a country and as an economy, want to gradually integrate into the Union's internal market, and I want to have my market operate by the rules that govern the internal market. For the investors, that's a very important message. We don't have the timeline, but we have a goal and an objective. And this has enormous consequences. It has consequences in terms of how the regulators operate in the market, in terms of the level playing field that Oleg was talking about, in terms of the judiciary, the rule of law, all the things that provide the investment climate and the soft security for the investors to go in. The products that will take out the tail risk that exists in 2023 and might still exist in 2024, war insurance, export credit guarantees, all these stuff are super needed to start the process. But the real kind of guiding post and long-term or even medium-term information for the investor is that this is a future member of the European Union, which means that there is a lot of money to be made on the way because you know what is the objective in terms of the regulatory space in which you will be undertaking your investments. So I think that what it means that given the choice that Ukraine has made and given that the support to the choice that the Union has expressed by granting the country the candidate status basically frames in certain terms, the space, the regulatory space in which the reconstruction will take place. In this space, there are enormous choices for the Ukrainian government to make, for the Ukrainians to design the plan, the future of the country, the business model, etc. But the frame for that is provided by the future Union membership.
Ben, you've been working on Zeitenwende, and I have to ask you about it. We've been quite skeptical in Poland whether it really has been a watershed moment, etc. If you put it in a context of Ukraine's reconstruction, is German business ready to step in and engage financially in Ukraine now instead of Russia? What role would Germany like to play in the whole process?
Okay, thanks. But picking up just on a couple of things that were said and linking it to that question. So if I were a German investor sitting with a fistful of euros rather than a pocket full of zlotys, what would I look for in Ukraine? What would I see? I would see the pioneer state of our future. I'd see a place that's resilient, resourceful, innovative, inventive. We've seen demonstrated in the worst, most trying circumstances, human capital displayed going absolutely off the hook. I think we really see a potential proving ground for our technologies of the future as well. We see a low-cost, high-value place to actually restore our hope of progress. And if I were the German government, I'd see a place that I could learn from in terms of digitalization and bureaucratic efficiency, which maybe a deeper Zeitenwende would be needed to truly address. And I say that as someone who lives in and works in Germany. The Zeitenwende, is here, it's just unevenly distributed. And we've heard quite a lot about the real changes that Germany has made. We've seen the big package of military aid that's been approved this weekend. We still haven't seen Olaf Scholz, or still haven't heard Olaf Scholz say Ukraine should win. We still haven't heard Olaf Scholz say that Russia should lose. We haven't seen the commitment to getting off Chinese dependency. So I can fully understand the skepticism that exists around Central East European countries and other places as well when looking at the Zeitenwende. But I think it's important to pick up on the positive changes that have been made and use those as a platform for driving the real changes that Germany does need to make. Because my personal judgment on that is that the change doesn't yet go fast enough, but it certainly doesn't go far enough and across enough sectors. And a crucial testing ground for that will be the role in reconstruction and in the commitment of Germany to Ukraine's institutional foundation for that reconstruction. So no going soft or going slow on EU membership. Talk to the Czechs. Think about embracing this sectorally differentiated and accelerated integration process that they proposed during their presidency last year, whereby that progress in a particular sector is rewarded with more integration in that sector, rather than actually seeing it as a one-off big bang that you have to do it all at once. This would engender precisely the more for more and reward for return approach that we seek and incentivize people to keep on going. And it's indicative in this regard to think of the slogan of the Czech presidency of the EU last year, which I'm sure all of you remember and recite each day, which was Europe is a task, or we see Europe as a task. And I think we have to see this process as a task as well, and a task of working on ourselves as much as on Ukraine. In very practical terms, it's the last thing I'll say, Germany has indeed convened the donor platform, the G7 donor platform for reconstruction. There will be money, but I don't think those are really the litmus tests of whether Germany is committed to Ukraine's reconstruction. And actually a lot of it has to do with Germany making itself fit for the future as well. And the two things come together in a potentially really productive way where we don't have to choose one or the other if we have the suitable vision and determination to bring them together in a meaningful way.
Excellent. This brings me naturally to Adam and the following question. What's in it for Poland? So we've been one of the biggest military suppliers to Ukraine. We've been a key economic partner for Ukraine. Are we ready to play a key role in Ukraine's reconstruction? What could we gain, or possibly what could we lose from the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Well, you know, Poland is a medium-sized country, and medium-sized countries do not have enough capital to undertake large investments. And because large projects, they require capital, they require credit capacity, they require some human and material resources, and first of all, it requires willingness to take the risk, to take the investment risk. So Poland is probably too weak to play a crucial role in this process. Certainly, we may be a subcontractor for bigger companies, but we well know that the added value is quite limited for subcontractors.
Do you see this willingness? Do you see this willingness?
Well, there is a willingness among some sectors of Polish economy which are mainly focused on infrastructure, which are mainly focused on development of urban spaces when it comes to urban facilities. But what I truly believe, what is a Polish advantage? First of all, we neighbor Ukraine, so there is a better connectivity. Secondly, there is Poles know the market better, so we know Ukraine better. There are also some social contacts that may allow us to get on the ground and understand the context better. You know, let me give you an example of my institution, the Warsaw Enterprise Institute. We are just setting up 4 offices in Ukraine, not just in Kiev, but also on regional centers in Lviv, in Łódź, in Vinica. They will be open in 2 weeks' time, and it will be a place where we would like to bring Polish business community, where we would like to show them what are the options, where we would like to collect information from at the local level, from local institutions, from state administration, from self-government administration, to create a databases of companies, to collect questionnaires about needs for development. So what we can do is to prove effective at the grassroots level, at a regional level, that is off the radar screen of biggest countries and biggest companies. Certainly, one would say it is not reconstruction, but I believe we, during the first round of interventions, we agreed that reconstruction of Ukraine should be not just building back, but it should be about modernization of the country. So I believe this is an option for Polish business, and it is also beneficial for Ukraine, because such activity and Polish activity in Ukrainian regions at Hromady, at Rayon, at the oblast level is something that would also allow Ukrainians to create their own SME, small and medium companies. Poland is strong not because of large companies that could go to Kharkiv and rebuild the whole town. No, Poland is strong about medium-sized companies that are smart, efficient, and are able to get somewhere where large companies and large countries are not interested. By going there, by getting there, we could also create some synergies with local Ukrainian business. And it is something we try to do at the Warsaw Enterprise Institute.
Very sober assessment. Thanks for that. Dear audience, we do have time for a couple of short questions. Gentlemen, do we have microphones? Yes, here, gentleman in front.
Bartosz Owiecki. I represent Coke Industries, which is the second largest company in the privately held company in the U.S. And we have been approached by our Ukrainian colleagues already about reconstruction. And we've actually seen that there is some reconstruction going on in Ukraine. We see that in numbers, because we have, for example, a flat glass producing plant in Częstochowa. We produce glass which is used in windows.
Can we have questions?
Sure, that's my question is coming. And we've seen how there are, a year ago, a lot of trucks were going to Ukraine with our glass. But that number has dropped by half. And the reason why this happened is because there's cheaper glass coming from Russia to Ukraine. So the Russians are already participating in the rebuilding process of Ukraine, if you will. Now, we understand, obviously, you're in a very difficult position. We work together with Ukrainian customs, but at some point when the war is going to end, you will be faced with a situation where there will be Western products which are going to be more expensive, and you will still have products from countries to the east which were not really helping you, let's put it this way.
And the question
is, what are you going to do to stop these products from the unfriendly countries coming in, because you will not be part of the EU yet? And what is the EU going to do about this? Because there will be Western money coming into Ukraine, so that the money is not being used to buy products from countries which are not friendly. And just to add to that, we already lost our assets in Russia. We had the best performing 2 glass plants in Russia, which we had to sell because of the war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Professor Michta.
Yes, Andrew Michta, Marshall Center. A very quick question about the security dimension of reconstruction, okay? As I said, I think yesterday on a panel, maybe this morning, we need to look at securing Ukraine before we can really get private equity in there and businesses to invest. It's an obvious thing. So what is your assessment of the kind of defense establishment? What kind of a military does Ukraine have to have, number one? And number two, the larger question of Western security guarantees, including a path to NATO membership. How is this factoring into the conversation about reconstruction? Thank you.
So the third question, Justyna Szczudlik.
Thank you, Justyna Szczudlik, the Polish Institute for International Affairs. I have a short question because it was mentioned about the reconstruction of the security in the previous panel, also about China's role and the 12-point plan. And the last point of the 12-point plan is about reconstruction. So for the first time, China, in a sense of publicly said about this kind of reconstruction, probably would like to play a role. So I'd like to ask if we, I mean the West, also the Ukraine, are we prepared for the China's engagement in the reconstruction of Ukraine, and what we could do to minimize the risk and, of course, to maximize the benefits for Ukraine, of course. Thank you.
We have to stop here. Please feel free to pick up on the question, whatever you like, and we will start with Adam this time.
Well, on Polish glass, well, it is quite clear that there is a competition. And that there will be a competition. I think it is good that there will be a competition when providing Ukraine with some materials. But what we can do is to be at the regional level and to establish direct contacts with Ukrainian regions, because it is very important. We should understand that Ukraine has somehow changed as a result of a administration reform, and there is a lot of power at the lowest level, at the county levels, at the hromada levels. They do a lot of their decisions. May I have 3 sentences about infrastructure, because it is something which was not mentioned by us, and it is extremely important. It is extremely important for Ukraine, for Poland, and for connectivity within Europe. What we should do is to invest in bottlenecks that we have on the Polish-Ukrainian borders. When it comes to train infrastructure, road infrastructure, pipelines, electricity grids, all this stuff, it is something that should be the top priority, because it is not only about economic development, but it is also about security of Ukraine and Europe. Thank you.
Ben?
Thanks very much indeed. So an interesting set of questions. Let me tie them together with a response to what you asked before as well about neo-idealism. So Andrew, I think in terms of what you said in this regard, it's important to think about how we concretely tie and institutionally tie our destiny to that of Ukraine, which gives us the incentive to participate more strongly in their security going forward, which is also our security. This is an interests case as well as a values case, and the opposition between the two is strongly overstated, as Minister Baerbock put it in Berlin, speaking at a live event. She's called it total crap, which is a very neo-idealist position, I have to say, because you don't have to choose between those two things. And the importance of political vision in this was demonstrated very clearly and concretely on the 27th of February last year, when in 2 sentences, Ursula von der Leyen upturned 2 decades of EU policy on Ukraine. They are one of us, and they belong with us. Making good on that promise is the part of this security that you talked about, and actually giving the hope of the future that comes with that is there. It has to come with military support. It has to come with bilateral security guarantees until we get to NATO membership. But that vision of belonging is the key part of that, as far as I would see it. The last part to the question from Koch Industries, we will have a lot of work to do in this regard, and this goes to the China challenge question too. But this is part of, again, a neo-idealist position on friendshoring and its flip sides, how we pay that national security premium that we have to pay to secure our democratic futures. This is the costs that we have to explain to our populations why we will be paying them, and how to turn those costs into investments and to show that those are investments in the better future for all of us in the democratic world is the challenge of political leaders going forward.
Anna, what the European Union is going to do about it?
The European Commission is a very practical body, right? So should Ukraine decide to address these issues, because these is in the scope of the choices that at some point Ukraine will have to be doing. You do this through designing public procurement rules in a certain way. But again, these are the choices to be made, and in particular by the Ukrainian government, because it comes with cost and comes with ability to rebuild X or twice times X, depending on where you source your materials, and depending on how the business model of the country is going to look going forward. Maybe just to say, in terms of the security guarantee, I think a process with the, towards the union membership, as well as progressive integration into the internal market in selective sectors, which is already possible under the association agreement, and further financial support that also already offers, type of a soft security that bridges towards future steps. Thank you.
Oleg, final word.
Just a final word for the very first question we received. Let me be very, very clear. For Ukraine, Russian market is completely closed, just completely closed. We are not trading with Russia. We are not buying. We are not selling. So it's a huge development in the beginning of last year. If you go back to the statistics, you can find that before the invasion, let's say in 2015, for example, the share, obviously that Ukraine is export-oriented country. 50% of our GDP we were making from our export. 80% of our export was products with low value added. We are talking about metallurgical sector and agri sector. And at that time, the share of Russia in our export used to be on the level of 33–35%, meaning that we were paid in Ukraine by Russians for our export significantly. At the same time, in 2015, the share of Europe used to be on a level of significantly lower, let's say somewhere close to 25%. And obviously the situation has changed dramatically. Now we don't have Russia as our trading partner at all. That's why actually there are many, and also related to the rebuilding of the country, that's why we have a number of discussions in Ukraine in terms of our future logistics and the development of our logistics. We are oriented only to the West. That's why we are talking about the size of our railways. Is it really necessary to keep it at the size as it used to be in the past, or we have to rebuild it, and how quickly we have to rebuild to match, to fit the size in Europe. But if you have those issues and you do believe that there is that kind of import we are receiving, then it's definitely should be investigated from our own authorities. And if you have that kind of information, please submit it to our authorities. They are going to do a very fast investigation about that. But it comes also, you mentioned a very important issue, and unfortunately we did not discuss it, but this is the issue of sanctioning policy. And this is exactly related to the overall issue of the sanctioning policy and how strict we have to be in our sanctioning policy, and what has to be done in the future to make sure that in the nearest future, when we are talking about the sanctioning policy, in the terms that in the future, when we are talking about of rebuilding of Ukraine, so this is the way how we can save our money, because the more sanctions we are introducing now, the less damage is going to be done for Ukraine, and less money we are going to spend in the future in order to rebuild Ukraine. And these are issues also very important, and we have to keep them in mind also when we are talking about the rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine.
No Russians. Okay, so this way we are stopping the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our distinguished speakers for the very interesting discussion.